Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in from wherever you're at in South Dakota or beyond. My name is Christine Lang, and I'm an SDSU Extension Consumer Horticulture Specialist based in Brookings, South Dakota. And I'm really excited that tonight we have Curtis Braun joining us, and he is our SDSU Extension Food Safety Field Specialist. And I just want to highlight that this is one of a four-part series dedicated to starting the season safely on specialty crop farms. This session and all of the following sessions will be recorded and available for your enjoyment after the fact. We realize that this comes at a time when many folks are getting started on their farms and getting things ready in their community gardens and thinking about lots and lots of things, but hopefully safety is part of that. And I want to admit that this series was inspired by some of my own planning for my research group and how I wanted to train my staff this summer and be prepared to have a really successful and safe season by being proactive and preventative. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit that tonight's topic, which is dedicated to the South Dakota Cottage Food Law and how does this apply to my farm, is something that I know very little about as well. So I'm really looking forward to learning from Curtis Braun about the cottage food law in South Dakota and how value-added products can be produced safely, especially across the state, and especially with some new grant funding coming down the pipeline that might be supporting many of you who are listening to this call. So Curtis brings a wealth of knowledge on this topic. He has worked part-time with SDSU Extension for 7 years. His background is in food manufacturing with an emphasis in food safety and quality assurance. He has also worked for General Mills for 14 years in various food safety and quality roles. So Curtis brings a wealth of industry knowledge as well. And in his current extension role, Curtis is focused on food safety as it relates to processing value-added products. And Curtis has shared with me that he is happy to be stopped with any questions that come up during the presentation. So if we're on a topic or a slide and you're curious about what in the world does that mean, or how does it apply, or what would this scenario look like, do not be afraid to drop that question in the Q&A box. And Curtis has given me permission to jump in and let him know that there's a question. So without further ado, Curtis, I'm going to let you take it away, and we're going to learn about regulations and how they may or may not apply to us.
Sounds good. Yes, and thank you for the introduction. Just let me know if you can all see my screen.
That looks great. We're set.
Perfect. So I will go ahead and give an overview of the South Dakota Cottage Food Law. My understanding is that this law may apply to some of the foods that you're considering processing, but it may also not apply to you. And so, like Christine said, I'm open to fielding any questions with regard to if you have a certain food product that you're wanting to sell either from your home, the farmer's market, or even if you're looking to potentially sell retail. I can try and answer any of your questions to the best of my knowledge. I will move on. All right, so just some quick information. This is my family, 2 boys, a wife. My background is in nutrition dietetics. As Christine said, I've been working with SDSU Extension for about 7 years, been with General Mills for about 14 years, and a lot of my experience is really more geared towards food manufacturing and those value-added foods. So coming into Extension, that was a majority of my focus was providing a lot of educational content around food manufacturing, as well as taking over as a process authority for the state of South Dakota. And with that being said, I'll just jump right into it. Just so everyone kind of has a basic outline of how this presentation is laid out. What I'm planning to do is just go over the codified law as it's written in the Cottage Food Law, and then in subsequent slides, just explain how that would apply to you. And so the first codified law that we'll look at is 34/1835, and this really has to do with non-temperature controlled and baked goods. And so the previous law was written, which just included non-temperature controlled baked goods being allowed to be sold at your house. But this is expanded about 2 years ago when the cottage food law was amended or modified and opened things up a little bit. But basically, this law allows you to sell non-temperature controlled foods from your residence or at a farmer's market, essentially. And there is no more $5,000 sale limit. That was removed with the when this law was amended. And so essentially here you see at the bottom, cottage food laws allow non-temperature controlled foods and baked goods to be prepared and sold at your home residence. So even though the slide is talking a little bit about canned goods, I will get to that slide a little later. But the next question that pops up in everyone's mind is, well, what is a non-temperature controlled baked good or non-temperature controlled good? And so the law does not specify or provide a lot of specifics around examples around non-temperature controlled goods or baked goods. But essentially, I gave some examples of things that that have been brought up, and so this would include low moisture foods such as nuts. Gave a few examples there: grains, seed, dry mix, baked goods, and hard candies. And so, more recently, what I've seen is questions around can people sell freeze dried candies from their residence or at a farmer's market? And with the new law, this is permissible since those are low moisture foods and they are not temperature controlled. So as you can see here, this law really kind of opens things up quite a bit for people and allows a lot of different types of foods to be sold with comparison to only non-temperature controlled goods being allowed to be sold previously. So there does appear to be some sort of a clash. It's really not a clash though with this specific law. One of the examples that I've put down here is that even though, like, for example, jerky or honey are not considered to be or are considered to be non-temperature controlled goods, they are regulated by a different body within South Dakota. And so one of the common examples is, well, homemade jerky. What if I go ahead and make my own jerky and I dry it, and can I sell that from my house? And the answer is the South Dakota Animal Inspection Board. They are the ones that oversee this, as well as if you were to potentially sell interstate or even sell wholesale, you would be in a different ballgame in terms of the regulatory body that you'd be under. So that could either be AIB or that could be FSIS or USDA. Another example would be honey. And so there's all sorts of laws within the Department of Ag around apiary laws. And so even though that's a non-temperature controlled good, that type of product is regulated by the Department of Ag. And so just because this law allows for non-temperature controlled goods and baked goods to be sold, there are some caveats where there are some different food products that are not allowed to be sold under the cottage food law. So the best thing that you can do, or what I would recommend, is that if you have a product that you believe to be non-temperature controlled good, but at the same time, you're not really sure if it's regulated by either AIBS, FSIS, or the Department of Ag, is you can always reach out to SDSU Extension, and we can talk about what type of product you're intending to sell. And just to kind of preface that that discussion, there are always four things that I look at. I would call them the four P's. it is your product, your process, your packaging, and your place. So those will determine where you may or whose regulation you may fall under. So depending on the product, depending on how you're processing it, depending on what type of packaging you're putting it into, and then where you're intending to sell at your place, farmers market versus retail versus interstate versus online. Those things can all change and help determine where or whose regulation you fall under. So just as a caveat, those 4 Ps, product, process, packaging, and place, are all important to determine where your product would be sold. Right, next slide here. So the next law that we'll discuss is 34/1836. And so no canned good is allowed to be sold that has a pH that is above 4.6. So things that are canned goods that have a pH that less than 4.6 would be considered acid or acidified. Those are allowed to be sold, or canned goods that have a water activity below 0.85. If anyone's wondering where that 0.85 comes from, that's really comes from vegetative pathogens, what type of water or what level of water activity is needed to have growth for some of those vegetative pathogens. So the law reads, except as otherwise provided in this section, a producer selling canned goods, they can basically either take a food safety, an online food safety course that's been approved by the Department of Health. It's available online. They would need to, there's a certificate that's printed at the end of the completion of that training, but you essentially have 2 options. One, you can take that online training, which will last you 5 years, and or you could send your products in to be tested. And that's that third bullet point, is that you can send it into a third-party processing authority that is going to review your process, your recipe, test the pH or water activity, and then we would provide, or the third-party processing authority would provide a letter of verification. And so for any canned good being sold in South Dakota, those are essentially your 2 options: online training or having it tested by a third-party processing authority. And so what this online training looks like is, or SDSU has put together, sorry, I'll say that, SDSU Extension has put together online training. Much of the training is based on general canning principles, as that's been considered the higher risk, but it also covers freezing and drying, and but much of it has to do with general safe canning principles. So this course that has been put together by SDSU Extension has been reviewed by the Department of Health. I would say that it would probably take 4 to 8 hours to complete. It is self-paced, and so you can start it, you can stop, and you can take it whenever you have time. There are quizzes there. I get a lot of questions around, what if I fail a quiz? Well, the quizzes are there really to test your knowledge, and you can take those as many times as you would like, but they are not a pass-fail. They're essentially just knowledge checks. And so this is essentially the overview of the approved online training. The cost to do it, I didn't cover that. The cost to take this course is $40. And as mentioned in the previous slide, it will last you for 5 years, and you have a certificate when you complete the course. The other option is that you can have SDSU Extension test your product and review it. And so at the end of this process, depending on the the outcome of the pH result as well as an overview of the process, you'll get an acid verification form giving the approval that this product has been reviewed by a third-party processing authority and is okay to be sold. And so if you're ever going to the farmer's market or Department of Health or even one of your program managers at the farmer's market ask for verification, you would either give them your certificate or this acid verification form, just depending on which route you chose to take. The one other caveat that I will add here is that SDSU Extension has invested in some technologies or capabilities to be able to review non-evidence-based recipes. And when I say non-evidence-based recipes, think of those recipes that are not included in like the National Center for Home Food Preservation, those that have not been reviewed or are published by Ball Canning. So what SDSU Extension essentially did was we invested in making sure that we had pH meters, but the other piece of equipment that we invested in was temperature probes to measure the time and temperature of the internal temperature of the canned good while it's in a boiling water bath, as well as got evidence-based research around thermal kill steps needed to provide a kill step for a certain time and temperature of a product in an acid or acidified canned good. So we've rolled this out with the master food preservers. We are keeping this program within the state of South Dakota at this time. Right now, our intention is to keep this at no cost. I know that that might change given the level of volume or interest, but right now we're able to provide that for free. We're rolling it out slowly, but it is something that is brand new, and we're looking to see who is interested in this type of service or technology.
So Curtis, I'm going to stop you right there because I do have a timeline question on that. And I know that it's always mean to put someone on the spot. Like, can you give us a timeline on something new? But if I have my family's canned tomato sauce recipe that doesn't quite, that's a bad example, but doesn't quite fit an evidence-based recipe because I'm also adding bananas or something weird to it. And I submit it to you for this third-party review. And I'm also really excited to roll it out at the farmer's market in 2 weeks. Like, what's an actual realistic lead time that you'd like people to give you for that review process?
Yeah, so in a brochure that I recently just published to give a timeline on it, I had put a month. And the reason I put a month was since I'm part-time with Extension, and this process usually takes 3 to 4 hours to complete, and I'm not sure what type of interest I'm going to get. So with the master food preservers, for example, we allowed them to submit 1 to 2 recipes, and so that could be 12 to 24. So depending on the level of interest and how backlogged we could get, it could take some time. And so I tentatively put a month, but depending on the backlog, it could be sooner, but I certainly wanted to put a month there just in case.
Okay, excellent. And I had another question that crossed my mind, and I feel that this might be a good place to ask before we segue further. So if I am starting to make a dried strawberry and sunflower mix based on the specialty crops I'm growing on my farm, and it's just a dehydrated mix, like a trail mix, my understanding is, would that fall under the first regulation of non-temperature controlled, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Now, my follow-up question is, are there still best practices or resources that you would recommend people use so that I'm not I have like cats and dogs, for example. So I think about like, how do I prevent cat and dog hair from getting into my trail mix that I'm selling at the farmer's market? Like, what are your recommendations around best practices in those things that are exempt?
Yeah. So I would maybe give an example, and Rhoda might appreciate this. But if you have something like a tomato and you are looking to freeze dry it, take out all of the moisture and make it a low water activity, low moisture type of food. Say, for example, a bird comes and has droppings on the tomato. The freeze drying process, although it's taking the water out, it's not going to kill any of the bacteria there. And so having good agricultural practices of making sure that you're using clean utensils, clean apparatus, washing off your vegetables, that is still very important, because sometimes I think what can happen is people will dry their foods, or they'll freeze dry their foods, and they'll think that I killed everything, it's good. That's not the case in some of these methods or technologies. And so you still need to maintain either good agricultural practices or good manufacturing practices, good hygienic practices while you're processing your food. That would probably be the best example I could give, where there's a processor that believes that their processing a certain processing technology removes or reduces a hazard to an acceptable level, and it actually doesn't.
Oh, even if I'm thinking about going the drying route, it would probably be good if I paid the $40 and took the food safety course to understand how to make my kitchen or my space safer.
Yeah, that one, it will focus more on the canned good side. I think that freeze drying question is something that the Department of Health, I had asked them a question as well with regard to have they been getting a lot of questions there, and they have gotten a lot more questions around freeze drying technology, and they've been giving the exact same advice for those that are wanting to go into it, which is yes, it's acceptable to freeze dry, and you do fall under cottage food laws. And you technically don't have to take the course for those types of foods, but beware that that is not going to eliminate pathogenic hazards to an acceptable level if you just simply freeze dry it. So I would say that that's a big watch out for that type of product category that technically falls under cottage food law, does not require taking an online course, but it's something that is a risk with that type of product.
Okay. We should remain aware of our environments and what we're doing both on the farm and in the kitchen. And that's a great reminder for folks. If you have questions about the on-farm food safety session 2, which will be next Tuesday night, is going to be led by Rhoda Burrows and is going to really focus on the on-farm food safety. All right. We have another question that popped up, Curtis. I guess this was a good place to pause. So someone had a vendor at a farmer's market make bread and cakes with cream cheese frosting, and it was sitting out on their tables. Is that okay?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot because there is um, there is a language in the cottage food law that talks about cream fillings. And I do think that there is a difference between the there is a difference between the cream fillings versus cream frostings. And so the cream frostings are typically like a low water activity, ready to eat type of spread or frosting. And so those are not typically held at below refrigerated temperatures, or they can remain out at ambient temperatures. They're not being held for at refrigerated temperatures for food safety purposes. They may be for quality purposes, but for those cream type uh, frostings, those are typically low water activity and ready to eat. spreads, and so they're typically not something that needs to be refrigerated. And so that's uh, the guidance that we give there is they don't need to, or it would be fine, or it would be acceptable.
All right, I think that rounded out our break for questions for right now.
Okay, excellent. Let's see here. Okay, so the next would be, or codified law would be 3418, and this was really in addition to, or this was in addition to the cottage food law. And so what this allowed for was any non-heat processed fermented food is allowed to be sold as long as it's maintained under 41 degrees. Um, the second would be cooking and baked goods that require time and temperature control for safety, including pies, cheesecakes, baked goods having a custard, cream filling, sauces and pesto that require time and temperature for safety. They can be sold as long as they're below 41. And obviously, the key word here is for safety reasons. There's the difference between being refrigerated for safety versus being refrigerated for quality. In the instance that it's refrigerated for safety purposes, yes, you would definitely need to make sure that you keep refrigeration. There are times where it is refrigerated for quality purposes, but the law clearly says that anything that is refrigerated or needs temperature control, it needs to be kept below 41 degrees. And then the other one would be home processed frozen fruit and produce. That can be sold as long as it's kept below 0 degrees or frozen temperature. And so all of these foods right here are new to the cottage food law. And so I know that I get probably the most questions around this second bullet point around temperature controlled baked goods. I do get some questions around not heat processed fermented foods. So I think the biggest one is probably kombucha. I do not get that many questions around frozen fruit and produce, but essentially these are what are allowed to be sold under the law. If you do, I'll go to the next slide. If you do sell one of these products that fall under 3418, the baked and frozen goods, you would be required to take the South Dakota Department of Health online training that's provided by SDSU Extension. And so just to watch out is that if you are intending to sell those types of products, you do need to take the online cottage food law training course.
So Curtis, of course, I'm going to be the exception to the rule because I'm sitting here thinking about like, what if I wanted to start a frozen sweet corn slash sliced carrot slash ready to eat shelled frozen pea side hustle, and I have a way to bring a freezer to the farmer's market and keep those products frozen. Like, what should I be thinking about if I'm trying to start a frozen vegetable enterprise? Mostly because I spend a lot of time thinking about how to sell things out of season.
Yeah. So when it comes to selling, and I'll try to keep it simple, or the answer simple. So when it comes to selling any of that frozen produce, as it relates to food safety, I would just go back to the good agricultural practices of ensuring that your workspace or your processing space has been cleaned, has been sanitized, knowing that freezing does not kill any pathogenic bacteria. I know that sometimes when we think about freezing foods, one of the things that comes to mind is, well, if I freeze it, pathogens will die because they're just pathogens and they're just kind of like humans and they will not survive. And so actually, in food manufacturing, one of the biggest pathogens that's troublesome in refrigerated or frozen kind of manufacturing environments is Listeria monocytogenes. And so just because something is frozen doesn't mean that it can't grow or survive. In fact, it can, even though it may not grow, it can still survive. And so when thinking about selling those types of products, the good agricultural practices, making sure you're using a clean workspace, making sure that you're washing and using good hygienic practices, those all go hand in hand in knowing that freezing, as you were mentioning before, is not something that's going to kill bacteria. And so just keeping those principles in mind will help ensure that you make a safe product.
Awesome. And I have kind of a scaling up question while we're here then, Curtis. So, I'm thinking about this first, like, okay, I'm going to start a frozen vegetable business. I'm going to take everything to the farmer's market. If I am then pivoting or expanding and looking at wholesaling to restaurants or trying to get my product into my local grocery store or food co-op, am I still under the cottage food law or have I moved into a different realm?
Yeah, once you've decided to sell to retail, you've moved into a different realm. You do fall under the Department of Health. If you do decide to go wholesale or interstate, you fall under FDA at that point. And so, what I always try to encourage processors to do is to start small, either at the farmer's market or from your home residence. If you find that your company is growing, my next advice would be to test how your product does either at a local retail store, um, because the requirements there are that you have to process that out of a licensed kitchen. And the process to do that is not nearly as cumbersome or as heavily regulated as it would be if you decided to sell wholesale. You would be under the FDA. You would have to have your FSMA plan. You would have to comply with federal laws. And so, what I always encourage processors to do is to invest wisely. Don't put yourself under more regulatory scrutiny than you need to, and to and even the process of getting or finding a licensed kitchen, um, uh, that can be done. And in fact, SDSU Extension wrote an article on how to how to get a licensed kitchen. And essentially, you have three options. The first option would be you could build your own. The second option is you could find a licensed kitchen and potentially sell out of that. The third is you could find a kitchen. So you could think of like a church kitchen that, or a kitchen at church that is not licensed, but work to get that license. And the process to do that is outlined in that article. It's not nearly as cumbersome. So when people think of building a licensed kitchen, they're thinking of like a $30,000 investment or something like that. And they're looking at all of the food service laws and all the sanitary design requirements. And that can be pretty daunting. And so I think when you look at selling to retail and processing your product out of a licensed kitchen, take a look at that resource and determine what is best for you. It may not necessarily be building your own $30,000 kitchen. You can work with the South Dakota Department of Health and basically say, this is what I'm looking at selling. This is the process. Here's what I would need. And they could work with you and help you understand what type of sanitary design requirements, plumbing, electrical, like sanitary design of walls, floors, venting, plumbing, things like that. They can work with you so that you're not building a kitchen with unnecessary unnecessary design, and which would lead to your higher costs. So just something to consider if you're looking to expand.
Awesome. That's really, really helpful. And if people are looking to expand, um, I heard you say Department of Health, but are you still a great person to start with and then you redirect based on where people are at in scaling, or what's your recommendation for points of contact?
Yeah, I would say check with the extension first.
Okay.
The questions that I essentially ask are those 4P questions: product, process, packaging, place. And then that really kind of helps me understand um, what you're making, where you're intending to sell it, and how you're looking to scale. And basically just lay out some of the options and lay out whose regulation you'll fall under, and how to do it at the lowest cost. Because obviously we want it to be safe, but also want it to be feasible for the processor to do it with the least amount of regulation. And so that's or avoid. And I don't want to make it sound like it trying to avoid regulation, but as you scale, inevitably you'll run into that. And so just want to make sure that anyone that does decide to scale is aware of some of those hurdles that come along with it.
Awesome. That's really helpful. I'll turn it back to proceeding. I appreciate understanding how that works.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Good questions. Um, okay, so 34, 18, 37. This is essentially uh, I don't believe that there was much changed on this, but essentially this is just calling out the requirements for the needed information on a food label. And so here it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 8 requirements that need to be put on your food label. And these are pretty straightforward. I don't get a lot of questions on this. And the law is pretty straightforward on what is needed. The one thing that I will say with this is people sometimes will have questions around, okay, Curtis, I don't necessarily want to, I have this cookie and I can't fit all of this information on a food label. What kind of options do I have? One of the things that we've advised is that you could simply just hand out a paper that has all of this information on it, rather than create your own label. And that seems to be a feasible or a viable option for folks that aren't able to fit all this information on their food label. So you would just need to have this present and be able to give it to the buyer, but you would need to have this information available. One of the other things that Extension is able to do is we have a Genesis software labeling program. And what we can do is we can generate nutrition facts panels and ingredient declaration statements. The cost to do this is free. And just a caveat to this, this is pre-2016 software. So essentially what that means is there was an NLEA update, a National Labeling Education Act update, which required the nutrition facts panels to be updated to basically bold or call out certain minor or macro nutrients. And so this software is able to calculate vitamin D and potassium. The one drawback to this is that it does not have added sugars, and so that must be calculated manually. And so with those processors that are wanting to have a nutrition facts panel that is up to date post 2016, there are nutrition facts panel generators that can where you can input this information that we give you here and give you the most up-to-date nutrition facts panel. but we're able to calculate your macros and your micronutrients with this nutrition or this Genesis labeling software, and provide you those values that you can plug into a more updated software labeling program. If anyone's asking the question, why don't you update it? The cost is pretty high to do this on just an annual basis, and we just don't have the demand right now to justify it. So we've stuck with the pre 2016 software program, and so far it's met the needs of the processors thus far. If you're asking a question, what is the turnaround time? Typically, I can get these turned around within a week. Just the one thing I would say is I recently got one where there was about 20 labels, and that's taken quite a bit of time. And one of the reasons is simply needing to get nutrition information for some ingredients where I cannot find those things online by either the distributor or the supplier. And so sometimes it can take a longer amount of time than 1 week, basis how I'm able to track down some of this nutrition information for the ingredients. And then 341838 is essentially saying that anything that falls under these cottage food laws, you do not need license fees. And essentially what these license fees are is like the if you do not fall under cottage food law, the requirement is that you would need to get licensed. And when we talk about licensing, that's really licensed by the South Dakota Department of Health and processing your product out of a licensed kitchen. So if you don't fall under cottage food laws, you are exempt from this license or licensing. If you do not fall under the cottage food laws, you would not fall under this, and you would be required to be licensed by the Department of Health. So one other call out with this with the cottage food law is that you do need to sell at your primary residence, or allows you to sell at your primary residence, the farmer's market, a roadside stand, or another temporary venue. The seller or a person residing at the seller's primary residence needs to be there at the time of sale, or you could also personally deliver the food to the buyer at the completion of the sale. So a lot of questions that I get is, Curtis, I want to sell this at like a storefront, and do I fall under cottage food law? And the answer is, so I've got non-temperature controlled baked good. I want to sell this baking mix, and I want to sell it at this this storefront. Am I allowed to do that? And the question is, are you going to be there at the time of sale? And the answer is no, I'm not going to be there at the time of sale. Well, then the answer is that you technically do not fall under under the cottage food laws then. So you do need to be present at the time of the sale. And so that is a sticking point here to be able to ensure that you fall under cottage food law. The next question is, what constitutes as a temporary venue? And so the Department of Health has given some rough kind of guidance that says if it's a place that is open for a few hours at a set frequency, or like one day, 2 days, that would technically fall under a temporary venue. So you think of like the farmers markets, by definition, they are a temporary sale venue. Another question I asked, or that I get asked, is, well, what if I want to set up like a temporary sale venue at a store? I'm planning on being there and selling it, and the store is okay with that. Yes, that would typically fall under what would be considered a temporary sale venue, and so you would still be able to sell your food there. So, just gonna move to the next screen, and so that essentially covers the cottage food law. Um, I know a lot of people will have questions with regard to their product. They may think that their product doesn't fall under the cottage food law, or they want to sell to retail, or they want to sell across state lines, or they have questions around potentially where they're selling. And so, if you have any questions, what I would say is feel free to either email me or give me a call to discuss the options. I was telling Christine earlier, typically when we have these conversations, it's typically like a 20-minute conversation because there are so many questions. They're all good questions, but it typically there's always those rabbit holes that need to be flushed out. And so feel free to reach out to me if you do have any of those questions, and I'd be happy to do my best to answer.
Well, I'm going to give audience members a chance to drop any questions, anything you're curious about, even if it's a special case. We might all learn from that case, as we did with the cream cheese frosting. So if you have any questions, please drop those in the Q&A. And Curtis, maybe while folks are thinking, I wanna pitch a question to you and then give you a minute to think on it. But what are some of maybe the 3 to 4 most common mistakes or hangups, or, oh, I didn't realize this applied to me, that you encounter? And I want to give you a second to think about that and just highlight for folks, if you have questions for Curtis Braun, especially if you're watching this recording after the fact, you can look up Curtis on our SDSU Extension website, and all of our SDSU Extension specialists have a profile page with their detailed contact information. And I especially want to highlight that if you scroll to the bottom of Curtis's profile on the Extension website, you can see all the articles he has written, and you can click view more articles or view all by the author. And you can find the resources on licensed kitchens and many more really wonderful resources. And that's a great way to also find the cottage or the food safety training that you can sign up for and take. But I have a lot of extension colleagues, but I will say that Curtis, I just want to commend you that your articles are very detailed and very helpful. So of all the extension colleagues I have, I actually low key in the background find your articles to be some of the most helpful. But I want to pivot back to you on what some of those things that you have noticed that happen on farms or, in processing situations that could potentially be avoided with some helpful advice.
Yeah, I think, and this is a non-food safety thing, but I think what some of the feedback that I've gotten from processors in a roundabout way by the Department of Revenue is that when processors fall under the cottage food law, and they think that or they do fall under the cottage food law, and they see the no license, they immediately think that there is no sales tax or anything that needs to be reported. And so one of the things that I just want to highlight is that no license does not mean exempt from sales tax. And so I just want to put that plug in there for the Department of Revenue, because it sounds like they've gotten quite a bit of those things. I recently updated my article to include that, so I apologize if that wasn't clear or if anyone didn't pick up on that. The second thing I would say is that usually when processors reach out to me, I find that they don't know what they don't know. And that's a good thing in that they're reaching out to ask questions. But I haven't really found too many processors that have done something and created some sort of a um, gotten in trouble with the Department of Health or gotten in trouble with the Department of Ag, what I've typically experienced is that um, they reach out beforehand. I have had one or two instances where someone has sold something at a venue and they didn't correctly understand the cottage food laws. And so what I would typically just say is that if you don't understand them, that's okay. We're here as a resource to help you navigate through them. But do your best to understand them and then just reach out and ask questions. But I typically don't see too much around getting in processors getting in over their head and having to draw back and correct mistakes.
Well, that's heartening to hear that people are really starting and building from the ground up versus having to walk things back. So we did have an audience question come through, Curtis. Do frozen or dried foods sold by weight require a certified scale?
Oh man, that is a tricky one. So what I would say is if you're selling by weight, I believe that you would have to have a certified scale. And simply the reason being is that I know that that's retail, but I would have to double check on that honestly. But my quick um, guidance on that would be is that I can't see an instance of selling something by weight and not having a certified scale being acceptable. But I would have to double check on that. But in the absence of double checking, I would say don't sell your anything that is sold by weight without having that weight be certified.
Okay, excellent. And how does one go about purchasing, or like, how do I know that I have a certified scale? I'm realizing my bathroom scale is not going to cut it, but where do I buy this?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a manufacturing answer is that there are scales that that you can purchase which have been calibrated by a third party. And so my understanding is that you would need to buy a scale that can be properly calibrated by weights and measures. And so if you don't have a scale that can be calibrated by weights and measures, that it's not a scale that you would buy. Now, what type of scales can be calibrated by weights and measures? I'd have to do some more work in looking that up.
I feel like we've given you your inspiration for your next resource all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I'm gonna I'm gonna jump in for just a second.
Hi, Rhoda. Great to see you tonight.
Um, the state will certify your scale, and you need to have that done every year or every 3 years. I forget what it is, but there is a process for that. But as you indicated, must be able to be certified.
Okay.
That was a pretty
Well,
right.
that's helpful too. All right. Well, Rhoda or Curtis, since we've got both of you on, any other parting words of wisdom that folks should know before we sign off for the evening?
I think that there was a lot of information just in cottage food law. We talked about cottage food law. We talked about canned goods, licensed kitchens. One of the other things I would just say is take a look at the extension um, site, and that can be scoured for a lot of different resources, whether you're looking at how to make a food safety or safely, what type of jurisdiction or regulatory body you might fall under, or if you want to have your product evaluated, tested, or anything else, that's a good starting point. And as there are a lot of things to consider when you're first wanting to sell your product. So take a look at that. We've put a lot of effort into trying to provide as many resources as possible for processors to have the right tools to be able to not only comply with the regulations, but and make it, but also make their food safely and get the answers that they need.
Awesome. Well, Curtis, I really appreciate it. Before our audience members jump off, I do want to call out that in the chat, I dropped a short evaluation form, and I'd love to have your feedback on what you learned from tonight's session and if you plan to use that to train other people. And a reminder to everyone tuning in that this session is recorded, so feel free to share with any colleagues or employees or farmer collaborators. This will be posted on the SDSU Extension YouTube channel. And we got a little taste of who our next guest is going to be next Tuesday evening, same time, same Zoom link. But we're going to hear about the flip side of this conversation, which is really the on-farm food safety aspects, so that you're ensuring that you're bringing a safe product into your kitchen, whether it's your home or your commercial kitchen. And then the discussion is going to pivot to pesticide safety on Wednesday evening. And on Thursday night next week, we are going to round the discussion out with how to keep yourself and farm workers safe amid high heat and air pollution warnings and all of these nasty things that we deal with during South Dakota summers. So we look forward to seeing you on multiple sessions next week. And Curtis, once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I have a hunch you'll be hearing from a few people with some follow-up ideas and wanting to address those 4 Ps that you mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Have a great evening, everyone. And thanks for tuning in.